to talk to you about what I call extended reality, XR, and by that I mean to say augmented and virtual reality, and how they're going to change computer interface very soon. In fact, today you saw a little demonstration of VR that went a little wonky, and that should tell you about the state of this technology that we are in today. It's in that slightly disappointing knee of the curve that you've seen, I'm sure, so many times now from our speakers. But within the next 3 years, it should replace every single one of your computing devices, especially augmented reality. At least that's according to Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, but what does he know about computing, right? So the thing is that today's interface is really complicated for us humans because we train humans, I can't get it to go right. All right, so we train humans on how to operate computers, right? We train the human what buttons to push in what order to unleash the technological powers within there. Now, of the 7 billion people on this planet, there's only about 18 million computer programmers, right? That's a really small percentage of people that are really able to wield technology to its full power. The rest of us use something called guided user interface, in which you have to pay attention to what's happening on the screen in order to get the technology to do the task that you want it to do. Heidegger would have called this unready to hand. By that I mean to say, you know how a wobbly hammer, you have to pay so much attention to the operation of that device that you're really not able to do the hammering action. In fact, you're dividing your focus between, in the same way, you're dividing your focus between the interface and the task you want the technology to do. Now, this is a bit of a problem, and let me give you an example. Let's look at GPS. GPS is an issue for us. Sorry, I'm not seeing my next, there we go. So GPS is quite a problem, and this is why. So if we look at this screen, even on this ginormous screen that you have here, by the way, I've never seen such a big screen in my life, it's really difficult to read all of that information. And you're having to provide all the context to the device. You're having to tell it where you want to go and what you want to do with it. Now, this is an amazing technology. It gets you out of really stressful traffic jams and takes you to places you've never been before, sure. But you're spending so much time focusing on this that you're not really focusing to the task that you're wanting it to help you with, right? Instead, you're spending about 50% of your time looking at the screen and 50% of the time looking at the real world. Unfortunately, this creates a multitasking situation because you're both operating the device and doing the task. And each and every one of us are terrible at multitasking. In fact, anytime you add an additional task to whatever task you're doing, you reduce your ability to do either by half. Now, that's pretty significant, no? The problem is that we as human beings have very limited short-term or task-based memory called your working memory. That's the part of your brain that's keeping track of all the information in a given context for a given task. And anytime you interrupt that and introduce another task, your brain wipes out all that stuff in your task memory to free it up for this new task. Let me give you an example. You're sitting on your couch. You're really cold. So you decide you're going to go to your bedroom and get a sweater. So you get up and you walk into your room and you walk through that door and you go, wait a minute, what am I doing in here? You're not getting old. It's just how your brain works, right? It's being efficient. It's keeping track of everything in the context of sitting on the couch. And then the minute you walk through that door, your brain says, new context, new task. Better clean this out so that we can be ready for this new situation. Now, that interruption is called the doorway effect. And every time we create an interruption in our thought process, we create an interruption that costs anywhere from 0.3 seconds to 30 minutes to get back to the task at hand. This is especially true in computing, right? I don't know how many times I have been working on a Google Doc and then tried to go to my email, but had to pass that Facebook tab in order to get there and lost hours to, that Facebook hole. Yeah? So every time you're using your interface, you're creating this kind of interruption. And to give you an idea of how much of a problem that is, you check your phone 2,600 times a day. That's 2,600 times a day that your phone alone is interrupting your thought process. We're not even talking about all the interruptions that happen when you're working on your computer. This is a constant level of busyness that is preventing us as humans to do that deep creative thought that our brains are designed to do. In fact, it's been proven that screens are killing our ability to think. We're putting this kind of governor on our brain's ability, slowing it down dramatically. Meanwhile, technology is getting rapidly faster, right? You heard about Kurzweil's theory of accelerating rate of change, and that is definitely happening in computer. It's getting faster and faster and faster thanks to Moore's law. Let's take a look at this. For example, back in 1997, you could get 1.3 teraflops of computing in the size of a refrigerator for $55 million. Now, a teraflop is a trillion calculations per second. That's like you sitting here and doing 1 + 1 = 2 a trillion times per second. Okay, so in 1997, it cost $55 million. Last year, we had an Intel chip come out called the iCore 9, which can do a teraflop for $1,000. That means within the next couple years, you will have a teraflop of computing power in your pocket, in your phone. Right? That's how fast technology is moving. Now, of course, that's nowhere near the human brain, which can do a billion flops per second. That's how fast our brains are functioning. And while we may all be sitting here thinking we're nice and secure and thinking that's never going to happen, computers are never going to get there, by the year 2021, we will have an exaflop computer for the price of $1.8 billion. And that's if China doesn't come up with one faster than the US can. All right, so if that's the case, using Moore's law, it means that within the next 10 years, you will have an exaflop of computing in your pocket. That means you'll be carrying around a human brain in your pocket worth of computational speed. That's shocking, no? Something has to change. We have to be able to stay up in pace with computers. Good news is that we already know how to make tools that are what Heidegger would call ready to hand. By that I mean to say that great tools seem to disappear into your hand. They act instead as extensions of our mind and body. For example, a great hammer, right? You don't pay attention to operating the hammer. You're just moving your hand, and the hammer amplifies the output. And instead of having to focus on the device, you're just focusing on hammering the nail, one task, and trying not to hit your fingers. At least that's usually my goal, right? So when a tool is ready to hand, it requires no more focus than operating your body, right? It's a lot like walking. Walking is actually an incredibly complex activity. In fact, we saw all the failures that robots are having trying to accomplish that now, right? It's incredibly complicated. It requires that deep creative thought that our brains are designed for. Yeah, in fact, it's constant improv on our behalf, because what we're doing is we're always adapting to the environment that we're in. Yet, the brain treats it as requires no more focus than, say, controlled falling. It's such a limited amount of focus from your short-term memory. And it generates something called pink noise. Pink noise is that not quite random pattern that we do in walking, where each of the previous 10 steps are pretty similar to the next 10 steps with slight variations. This requires so little focus from the brain that it actually amplifies your ability to focus. It amplifies your brain's ability to do that deep creative thought. How many times have you been stuck on a problem and then go for a walk and suddenly solve it? This pink noise that's being generated actually amplifies your brain's ability to focus, in fact, by double. So the more pink noise we generate with our body, the more effective our brain becomes. Great tools do that same thing. That's why when they act as an extension of our mind and body, they actually amplify our ability to produce, amplify our output in dramatic ways. Right? So we're no longer focusing on the tool, we're just focusing on operating the body, which, as you know, requires very little focus. Perhaps that's why when we think of superhumans, we always think of their powers as being an extension of their mind and body. I mean, I don't remember Superman sitting there and pushing a bunch of buttons into a screen before taking off into flight. He just jumps in the air, and the body, the superpower amplifies his output. And it requires no more thought from him than jumping does for you and I. We are finally at the point in computing where we can create technology that is an extension of ourselves, thanks to something called perceptual computing. Now, perceptual computing is that whole suite of computing sensors, such as biosensors, emotion tracking, motion tracking, brain tracking, even eye tracking, as well as machine vision and natural language processing. So thanks to these technologies, we can use technology just by moving our body and thinking. And when we do that, we get computing at the speed of thought. No longer are we slowing our brains down, we're actually amplifying them dramatically, exponentially. To give you an example, let's look at this robot here. This is the Robonaut 2. It's the first humanoid robot on the International Space Station. This robot is tremendous. It can do amazing things. But for the purposes of our conversation, let's talk about that hand. That hand is amazing. It can lift incredible amounts of weight. It can do repetitive patterns over and over again, but yet it's gentle enough to pick up an egg. Now, if you know about robots, you know how big of a feat that is. It's an amazing feat. Unfortunately, in order for someone to operate this bot, they actually have to know quite a bit of computer language, right? They have to have a PhD in computer science to be able to program it to do the task that they want it to do. Now, GM saw this hand, and they wanted to be able to use it on the assembly line. On the assembly line, they don't have a lot of workers with PhDs in computer science, right? So in order for their workers to be able to use this, what they did is they took that robotic hand and they put it inside of a glove. So it's the entire robot's hand now in something wearable. So instead of having to program it to do the task, it's now operated like this. It just acts as an extension of the human body and requires no more focus than moving your hand. But with it, you can lift with the effort it takes us to lift 5 to 10 kilograms, we can lift 15 to 20. And we can do amazing repetitive motions without ever getting tired. So now this robot hand is just an extension of the human's abilities. In the same way, MIT created this mind control for training the Baxter robot. So this person is wearing an EEG helmet. It's not like going into the brain. It's just sensors on the outside of the brain, and it looks a little messy because it's a prototype, right? But what's happening is that we know there's a mistake being made faster than we can articulate it. So this sensor picks up that we think the robot's about to make an error, and the robot corrects its course right away, faster than the human can say, "You're making a mistake." okay? So we are training that robot at the speed of thought. Now, this might take a while for it to get into all of our hands, but XR is coming, like I said. 2021, that's the big year that we should expect this to explode. And it's going to lead this interface revolution. Because now I can just walk through a space and actually have all these technological superpowers right on board. For example, this firefighter, she's able to see that wall in infrared and know it's about to catch on fire and get out of there before it actually gets her trapped in there. And because there's an AI on board, it automatically alerts all the other firefighters in the building that there's a problem so they can avoid the area too. The reason for this is that XR puts humans squarely in the loop of cognitive computing. And by cognitive computing, I mean things like artificial intelligence, machine vision, robots, natural language processing, and AI, right? So basically what XR does is it makes that wearable. It gives us, to use a gaming term, God mode control over all the technology in our vicinity. Is fascinating because all that it's doing in order to give us these abilities is that it takes the screen from across the room. It removes that literal divide between you and the screen that requires you to be able to suspend disbelief enough to imagine as if you are there. And it just simply takes that screen and shoves it right up against your face. So you're doing exactly what your mom never told you never to do. You're looking really close at the screen. And now, instead of having to suspend disbelief, you have to do something called the suspension of belief. You have to tell yourself, this isn't real, this isn't happening. How many of you have tried VR or XR or AR? Awesome. That's a pretty good number. The rest of you, please try it, because you're going to be amazed. Now, what happens here, the reason this happens is because we're hijacking your visual sense. To give you an idea of how important that is, take your hand and put it on the back of your head. Okay, that's the size of your visual cortex. You can put your hands down. And your vision, it's implicit on both sides of your brain. It's not just on one hemisphere or the other. It's on both sides. And it's so important that vision is actually your dominant sense. It's what you use to triangulate what you touch, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste. Your sight is telling you what those things are. And it's implicit in nearly 85% of your brain's cognitive abilities. 85% of your brain's function is dominated by sight. So when you put on that VR, you have something called what Kevin Kelly from Wired calls a you-person experience. It's not a first-person experience, it's a you-person experience. You're so confused by what you're seeing that your body just doesn't know what to do. And you fall over. Yeah, I used to play this game in the lab and I got in a lot of trouble, so they made me stop. But it's important to realize how impactful this is. That illusion is so powerful that we can actually use it to transcend pain. Researchers at Washington's HIT lab were working with burn patients over nearly 85% of their body. As you can imagine, these patients were in excruciating pain, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So what the researchers did is they created this game called Snow World. And what you're seeing here is that, first things first, your brain gets confused. It's seeing an icy wonderland, and it's feeling this burning sensation. But the vision trumps what you're experiencing physically. So the brain says, that sensation is cold. I'm cold. In addition, you're being confused, you're being distracted because you're so focused on throwing snowballs at these poor little snowmen and penguins. And for some reason, they're playing Paul Simon. I don't know what the Paul Simon's about. But it confuses you so much that while morphine only reduces their pain by 20%, this VR game without any drugs reduces the pain by 60%. That's amazing. So VR allows us to leverage technological powers without having to stop and think about it. It's so powerful that allows us to transcend pain. It also radically improves our productivity. Let's take a look at this. This is an example from Skylight. And they're just using a heads-up display. It's not even augmented reality. It's just a display on a Google Glass that's in the same context of the work that this guy's doing. Now, the guy on the left, he's using a paper diagram, but for all intents and purposes, our screens are really just magical pieces of paper. So this is pretty equivalent to using a screen. Let's look at what happens. At first, the guy with the paper manual, he's doing a little bit better. But suddenly, the guy on the right starts to improve his productivity because he's no longer have to divide his attention between the two. Instead, it's all in the same context. In fact, it's so much more effective that he's 34% more productive. Imagine extending this throughout your entire life, how much more productive you would be. It's so helpful that it dramatically accelerates education. It's one thing to read about the human digestive tract. It's another thing entirely to go through it as a first person, yeah? You have a completely different understanding of that information. A lot of people learn best when they're having a kinesthetic experience, a hands-on experience, an application of that learning. And it has been scientifically proven that XR dramatically improves learning for that very reason. In fact, in Myanmar, 360 Ed, an SU company, is working to take all of those outdated textbooks and classrooms that are really difficult to get to for much of its population. And instead of trying to convert it into a computer, which not many people have access to, they're creating VR and AR applications on a smartphone, something that nearly all of its residents have access to. So suddenly, they have these tremendous learning programs in XR that are unlike anything they can provide in a classroom experience. Now, this doesn't just apply to young students. It's being used all over the world to do training in soft skills. Walmart's using it to train its employees in customer service. Airbus is using it to train airplane door installers so that instead of making errors that are costly on the actual airplane, they're making all of their errors in VR until they become perfect at it, and then they're sent to the floor. So it's having a tremendous benefit for all kinds of learners in all kinds of situations. But that's not all. I mean, it's one thing to accelerate education. It's another thing to amplify our senses. This is Neil Harbison. He is a colorblind artist. As you can imagine, an artist with color blindness, that's quite a problem. So what he did was that he took a little tiny basically a little piezo motor, a little speaker, and implanted it in his brain. And he wears this AR camera that translates all the colors that he sees into sounds. So now he can hear color. And not only can he see the regular spectrum that you and I can see, but he can see in all kinds of different spectrums, including infrared. So not only has he leveled the playing ground, but he's actually amplified his abilities dramatically in a way that we cannot through synesthesia. During the break, you heard about this program from YCAB. It's called the Brainport, and it's for blind people. Now, what you're seeing here is Emily, and she has this little tablet here that's basically a tactile tablet. Now, your tongue is your most receptive organ for touch. So she puts that on her tongue. And then this camera here is reading the world around her and translating it into a 100 by 100 pixel black and white image that goes onto this tablet. And with it, blind people can taste sight. They can actually see, right? So this guy, he can not only walk around and this is what they're seeing on the tablet, seeing. So he can read. He can differentiate between his daughter's face and her friends. He can walk around outside in the snow. All kinds of tremendous things thanks to XR. But that's not all. Of course, that's not all. I mean, as you heard, neuroplasticity, or the brain's ability to rewire itself, we used to think that at around age 7, this ability significantly decreased, that there was really nothing that you could do after age 7 to rehydrate that neuroplasticity. So people with diplopia, like my friend James Blaha here, he had a lazy eye. And in his late 20s, he decided to have it fixed. So he went to the doctor, and the doctor said, unfortunately, kid, there's nothing we can do about you. You may be really young, but your brain is your brain. We will never be able to reconnect your lazy eye with your brain. Now, James didn't want to take no for an answer, and so he went out and he created this VR game. And what you're seeing here is that one eye gets data that's slightly different than the other eye. After about a month of wearing this, James had full stereo vision in VR, meaning that the brain had rewired itself to be able to take in the data from the lazy eye. And after that, he thought maybe it was just in the game, but he took off the headset and suddenly he could see in full 3D in the real world too. He had rehydrated his neuroplasticity and created a new neural connection to that eye, something that before this we never thought was possible. We thought it was an incredibly rare ability. But he proved that anybody could do it. So as you can imagine, paraplegics were really interested in this type of tool. Paraplegics have lost the ability to communicate with the lower limbs, yeah? So the researchers at Duke University in the Walk Again project, they decided to do something about it. Now, the part of your brain that controls your leg is something called your motor cortex, and it runs like this. It's like a headband across your head. And it has different parts that control different body movements, from your arms to your eyeballs, to your mouth, to your lungs, and your legs. Right? And so what they did was they put a sensor, an EEG sensor, on the outside of the brain, right about here, which is the part of my brain that I use to do this. And as you can tell, it doesn't take much for me to do that. I don't have to focus on it. I just move my leg, yeah? So what they did was they put a sensor there, and they trained the 8 paraplegics to be able to use that part of their brain to control a pair of legs in VR. And when they got really good at that, they then attached a robo exosuit, pair of legs, so that now not only are they seeing their legs move, they're actually feeling their legs move. And after about 6 months, something incredible happened. The body started to regrow the muscles and circulatory system necessary for walking. And after a year, all 8 patients had voluntary leg control back in their rooms without any of the apparatus on. Right? They had somehow magically recreated a neural pathway from the brain to the legs and had voluntary control over the legs. That's superhuman ability to heal themselves. All because the interface to this technology has been removed, and instead it becomes an extension of our mind and body. So what's so important about this? Why are we talking about this now? What's different than all these other times? Well, back in 1993, when Washington did the Snow World, it cost $70,000 for this headset, and it was definitely not plug and play. But today, each and every one of us can go out and buy that same apparatus for $199. And it's super easy, unless you're unfortunately trying to do an alt space meeting here at the summit, right? So it's $199. So today, Cedars-Sinai is currently in clinical trials for VR pain treatment and for VR treatments for things like anxiety, depression, stroke, Alzheimer's, dementia, all these things. Because now, and especially because of this phone, in fact, every single one of you right now has an AR device in your hands, in your phone. It's just a simple software update that happened. And the phone is going to drive democratization of these superpowers in an astounding way. Because now instead of building hardware, you're simply building an app to run on the hardware. For example, this is the AccuVein AV400. It allows a phlebotomist to see this child's actual blood flow and know exactly where to put in the needle. Back when it was developed in 2014, it cost $5,000. Today, all of you right now can download that exact same tool for free. That's how dramatic this is going to happen. It's going to happen overnight. And soon you'll have any superpower you want. You want Spidey sense? We can give it to you. You want supercognition? You want to be like Trinity from the Matrix? Yep, got that. How about telekinesis, move objects across the room with your own mind? Yep, got that too. In fact, you can have any superpower you want, and you won't need a PhD in computer science to get it. This is coming. Yeah, sure, it's a little disappointing right now, but it's gonna come so quickly you're not even gonna know what happened to you. My question for you is, what are you going to do with your superpowers?